Hey y'all, Jeremy from the Archeryshack. We got a Mathews FX lefty here we're going to restring. And it's got a old whisker biscuit on it. We'll do a little whisker biscuit modification to show y'all how to take an old whisker biscuit and make it a quick load. So let's go to the press. We got a nice buckskin and tan string here we made. And we'll get this joker on there and get her tuned up. We'll get this joker pressed. Single cam bow is extremely easy to tune and restring versus some other stuff, but we'll take these old strings off. These are actually this guy's factory strings from when I sold him this bow in 2002 or 3 time frame. So how long has that been? 17 years. Good guy. It's a wonder these things, which I don't think he shoots a lot, but it's a wonder these things hadn't blown, but they are extremely dry. Please don't leave your strings on for 17 years because it's just this thing was a bomb waiting to happen. These things, I mean, they are dry as all get out. Usually I save the strings and give them to the customer just in case they need them as a backup, but I'll be honest, these I will probably chunk because I mean, I wouldn't have drawn this bow back with that set on there, no joke. Everything else looks good though. I mean, other than a little wear and tear and dirt and stuff, nothing major. So we'll get this joker looking good. Get our strings. I like to hold the ends of them so they don't untwist. And on this bow, I'm going to start with a cable. I'm going to click it on the bottom, run it up to the top. Get it on those little quick connectors. Then we'll throw our string on. Put it back on the same pegs. The shortest pegs is what he had it on, so we'll put it back just the same way. I was just trying to kind of make this a camo looking string and make it match a little bit, so I figured this camo pattern has got a lot of brown and lighter tan in it, so we used a buckskin and a tan. I thought it matched it pretty good. The old strings, I didn't measure them, but have definitely stretched out because I'm having to press this bow a few extra rounds just to get the new ones on here. But that's typical, especially of strings that are as old as what he had on here. I'm just glad he didn't get hurt. Get our cable slide hooked back up. The only different thing about this bow is it's a lefty, so we'll have to shoot it left-handed, but that's not a huge deal. We have a good many of those come through, more than you would think. Okay, we got our cam on. The other weird thing about this bow is normally with this particular cam, you time the cam when it's on the number 1 peg, which is the longest draw length. He has it on the number 3 peg, which is going to rotate the cam in a little bit. So I'm not going to be too concerned with cam timing. One, because we measured these after we stretched them on 100 pounds and know that everything's dead on the money for length wise. And two, the way you'd have to do that would be to put it on the number 1 peg, pretty much tune the bow, then move it to the number 3, and I'd rather tune it while it's on number 3, so I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to take his old peep out and put it in this new set. Let me press it just a hair. Pull our handy little string that shows us where the exact center of the string is at without having to dig around. And he's got a trusty old Fletcher peep. Been around for a long time, never failed me yet. Okay. So I'm gonna check, make sure everything's on again, make sure our little quick cable connectors are straight, and we will go over to the vise and start setting this bow up. They're looking good. Alright, so before we get started, we got an old biscuit. Used to, the biscuits didn't have the cutout for the arrow, but what we used to do was make a cutout. So what I'm gonna take this biscuit loose. It's got 2 screws in the front, and I'm gonna take some little side cutters or something and chop this thing, just to make it easier on him. This particular biscuit is from when Carolina Archery Products was still making them. Hashtag Carolinas. I'm gonna get this joker loose, see if it'll come out of there. There we go. The bottom of the biscuit had a little bit of an adjustment you could have, so it's already got one slot. I'm gonna cut him another one just wide enough to get an arrow in, like so. And then I'm gonna take some pliers, if I can find some. Excuse our shop, it's a huge mess. I'm gonna clamp down on the sides just to make sure those bristles don't want to fall out. Okay. Now he'll have a quick shot biscuit wannabe. I'm gonna tighten these screws back down. We used to do this. I guess a lot of people did this, and that's what made them actually invent the quick shot version where you can load it quick, because people didn't really care for having to feed an arrow all the way in. Normally these screws would be at the back, but this is a left-handed bow, so I guess it's just they flipped it backwards. No big deal. Not a biggie. Now, make sure an arrow fits in there. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. So what we're going to do, for one, is to flip this bow around. It's left-handed, so I'm going to just work on it backwards. We got our nice Baker vise here. Super adjustable. We're a big fan of it. Clamp a bow or a crossbow or a gun in it. I'm going to grab my levels and an arrow. The Baker vise just came out last year. We of course had to get one to play with, and definitely one of our favorite vices. I'm gonna get the bow level. If you ever use a cheap plastic level like this one is, we got a bunch of different ones, but it's just the one I grabbed. Always flip it around and notice this level is not, well, maybe it's me. Let me get it back level. It's level. You want to make sure when you flip it around it's still level, and this one's not, so we're going to switch levels out. Got another one. Front of the line. Alright, we can deal with this one, I think. I'm going to throw an arrow in here. His arrow. Put our level on there. And I'm going to grab some serving material. Now all we're going to do is level the arrow to the bow. It'll take me a minute here to get my serving started. Alright, I'll work my knot here till the arrow's dead level. That'll be our starting point. That looks pretty good to me. So I'll tie my inner knocking points. for my loop. This will make sure my arrow nocks don't get pinched from the loop trying to slide together from coming to full draw. So I'll tie these jokers on there, top and bottom, just like that. Final knot, get it snugged up, then I'll burn it, slide this arrow down out of the way. I can get rid of my levels at this point. I'll get that joker, oop, I pulled it on it too hard, get it tightened back up. Ugh. Get my arrow down. What am I doing? I'm caught on something. Okay. Get it a good burn. Tap it. Then we'll do the same thing on the bottom. And all this does gives it just enough gap. And honestly, on the whisker biscuit, this is overkill because there's no way it can lift up and come out of the biscuit. So I know most folks wouldn't go to this extreme, but I just like to know there's no preload or anything like that on the arrow. Get this bottom one tied on here. Get it good and tight. Then we'll put our loop on. Since this is a single cam bow, I'll go check the poundage. Make sure the poundage is close to where it's supposed to max out at, within a pound or two. And then we'll just go straight to the paper tuner. Again, on this particular bow, if it was in the number 1 cam position, we'll put me a little dot of glue on those knots because I don't want the friction of the knot coming off of here to eventually unwrap those little knots I just tied. Let that dry. That's just an accelerator. I'll let that dry for a second and then I'll put a loop on. And if I ever needed to take those knocks off for any reason, it's still not a big deal. I just take some needle nose and pull on it and it'll break it free. But it also don't let that arrow knock, you know, when he shoots it a couple hundred or 1,000 times, it won't let it fray those little loops up. And we'll take my loop, burn my end. Y'all pardon our mess. We got a big workbench here and there's random stuff everywhere. But it seems like every time we clean it, it gets back this way within a couple days. So it is what it is. I'm going to tie my bottom of my loop. Slide it up to those inner knocks, tie my top of my loop. Now I know this particular guy is shooting an older, pretty big headed release, so that means I'm gonna cut this loop pretty big just to make sure his release fits in it. So I'm gonna trim off our loop, and then I'm going to untie the top of it because I don't want to burn the loop itself. I'm going to fray it out and burn this. You got to be careful if you're doing this at home to not get air bubbles. There's a little, I know you can't hardly see it, but there's a little air bubble on the side of that. When I burn it, it'll pop. So I'll keep burning it and blowing it out until there's no bubbles popping in it. Little air pockets. I'll let that cool off for a minute. Okay, now we'll finish tying the top of our loop, and then we'll take our little skinny needle nose pliers. I just gotta find them. We'll take our little skinny needle nose pliers and snug it up. Now I want it to be tight, but I don't want it to dig into the serving. That's why I don't use those loop pliers, even though we've got several sets. I want this loop ultimately to be able to rotate around the serving but not dig into it. Okay. Now that that's done, I'm just going to click the arrow back on there. Everything still looks good. I'll take the arrow back off. What I'll do, since I have his old string and his old peep was tied in and everything, I'll go get his old string and line up the loops, and then put his peep back in the exact same spot. That way when he picks it up, all we got to do is have him shoot it a few times and make sure it's good. I will paper tune this bow, but when the customer comes in, I'll have him shoot it through the paper as well to make sure that it works for him the way it worked for me. I'm going to get that old string. So I went and got his string off the press. I'm going to line up his old loop, and I'm going to push this peep up and line it up to the old string, and then I'll go ahead and tie this peep in. That way it'll be set just like the old one was. So we'll do that. Luckily this vise, I can easily manipulate it and get it right down to where I need it to be without it dropping the bow. Get some serving here. I have a couple different ways that I like to tie in peeps according to what the bow's being used for. On most hunting bows, I end up just tying a bunch of little half hitches. The main reason is people are bad about wanting to change their peep height, and this will slide if you push it hard enough. But if it's somebody I know that will absolutely not want their peep to ever move, I have a couple other ways I do it. So I'm sure you'll see that on some other videos. Another thing that happens is when you tie in a peep, it compresses where the string naturally opens up from it going from the peep back to the bundle. And if I compress that, it actually twists this peep a little bit because I'm pressuring the twist of the string. So a lot of people will get a string and say, oh, my peep's twisting, and there's one of two things happening. Either they tied it in and just never got it back straight, or they I lost my piece of serving. Or they tied it in to where the serving will easily slide, and as they're shooting, that serving is sliding further and further apart and making the peep twist. We see that happens a lot, and people will be like, hey, my peep's twisting, but then you'll see that they tied it in with 2 or 3 little granny knots, and it just don't work that way. And as you can see, this peep was straight to start with, but since I'm compressing this twist, it's twisting toward me. So the way I'll fix it, I'll go put half a twist in it over at the press, pull it back a couple times, make sure it stays straight, because we don't want this guy to have any issues. Get these matching. Okay, we'll burn that. Oh, I told you a lie. The peep actually is straight. But as you can notice, for me messing with that string, the loop is crooked. So all I got to do is hold the string and twist that loop back straight. And now we're good to go. Let me flip the bow back up like this. And you can kind of see what I'm talking about. The peep is straight. I'm going to get the loop back straight. Go ahead and hit it with the pliers one more time. Snug it down just a hair. And from this point, we're going to go to the draw board and check poundage. And then from there, since we don't have to time cams or anything with it being a single cam bow, we'll go back and paper tune it. And then it'll be ready for him to come in. And when he comes in, we'll spend about 15-20 minutes getting it. Make sure the peep's right and all that to him. And that'll be it. You got her on? Mm-hmm. Alright, we're going to pull her back on our draw board here. She's right at 60 pounds, so I'm happy with that. One more thing we're going to check I hadn't mentioned yet is we're going to take our handy Spot Hog laser and run it down. The cable guard's blocking me. I'm going to run it on the other side. I want to set this on any bow with a yoke. I want to set this laser on the idler or the top cam or whichever cam has a yoke, and I want it to line up evenly on both sides of, we're touching the axle there, and we'll flip it to the other side, we're touching the axle there. That means I don't need to yoke tune anything at this point. It means at full draw this top idler wheel is dead straight with that bottom limb. That's the way I like to start it. Sometimes when we paper tune, we may have to adjust the yoke just a hair, but I put that laser on it and then I'll look down it, everything looks good. So now we'll take it and paper tune it. So we're going to shoot it through the paper. This is where I usually make sure it's paper tuned, and I chronograph it, and I cut out the piece of paper and give it to the customer along with, it'll have their arrow weight and their draw weight and everything on it. And let's see what this one does. As you can tell, looks like we got a perfect bullet hole, just like we wanted. A little different shooting a left-handed bow, but we've kind of had to learn how to shoot a left-handed bow since we tune them. So now we'll just wait for the customer to come pick it up and make sure it bullet holes for him. Hey, if you don't live in the local area and need to ship your bow somewhere, we'd be happy to tune it for you. We have a lot of folks do that. If you're anywhere in the upper South Carolina area, come see us at the Archery Shack. Our phone number is 864-735-8484. We'll be happy to talk to you and get your bow tuned or get you through tuning your bow. So give us a call, and I appreciate y'all watching. See you next time.